So we always laugh because Gordon Edgar, which we all know and love, and he's just a great guy, goofy guy. But when we first made, and this will introduce our Barely Buzz, when we first made Barely Buzz, Michael, you took it to the Today Show. If you
Yes.
remember this was a long time ago, and you wanted a quote, and one of the quotes we called Gordon Edgar up, said, Gordon, give us a quote about Barely Buzz, because he was a judge at ACS that year when we won first place with that cheese. And he says, it's about the only cheese I've ever had that has stuff on it that doesn't suck. So that was like, when we first started rubbing crazy stuff on cheese, people thought we were just these two yahoos from Utah that just didn't know what they can and can't do. And that's pretty much what it was. We didn't know what we couldn't do. When we told Utah State that we rubbed coffee on cheese, they kind of shook their head and they said, well, you can't do that. And we're like, well, come on down and tell us why. And they came down and they tasted it and they're like, well, and then they couldn't figure out a reason why, but they thought the acid in the coffee would mess up all this stuff. But you know, that's what put us where we are. We did stuff because we didn't know what we couldn't do. The example I love to tell, I've told it 100 times, but we were at the fancy food show, ran into a guy with a big Swiss cross on his name badge, and we got to chatting and talking. And he was a Gruyere importer. But he asked me what we did, and I said, we make a coffee cheese and we rub coffee on cheese. We're a small creamery from Utah. And he says, I know this cheese. And then he told me this story. He said, I was at a restaurant, Casa Lula in New York City, and out comes a cheese plate, and Barely Buzzed is on this cheese plate. And he's there with his friend, and he just basically went into a tirade saying, these stinking Americans, they just, what are they doing with our cheese? And the guy basically said, shut up. It wouldn't be on the cheese plate if it wasn't good. Try it. Open your mind a little bit. So he tries it, and he thinks, and he says, these brilliant Americans are doing things with cheese that they would be hung for in their country because you just don't do that. And so if I can do something that makes the cheese even better, then why not? And so there's nothing better than just a nice extra virgin olive oil, for instance. I love olive oil. And then you add some citrus flavors, and some people say, I don't want that. I just want pure olive oil, or I just want pure cheese. And I get that. But if we can do stuff that makes things more interesting, when we first introduced it, we were just kind of like, what are they up to? And now we're respected and people love the cheese. And so it's good. Barely Buzzed, Tim's brother, roasts the coffee down in Grand Junction, Colorado, about four hours from here. He sends us the beans whole. And in fact, right next to my office is our little kitchen where we grind the coffee the morning that we're going to make it. And one thing that's unique about our cheeses is we'll make the cheese. It comes out of the press. We put it on a table. We rub coffee and lavender on this cheese. We vacuum seal it down, and other than aging, the cheese is done. So because our cheese has so much fat and cream in it, we all know that those fats absorb flavors like crazy. And so the coffee lives for 5 or 7 or 8 or whatever months on that cheese as it ages, and the flavors go all the way to the center. I always tell people when they first taste Barely Buzzed to taste the cheese without the rind to start with. And you will get the flavors have penetrated all the way to the middle of the wheel. And again, it won't just hit you in the face like, oh, but then it'll start to come through. At the farmer's market, when we first started introducing cheeses, you'd say, it's got coffee and lavender on it, and they just keep walking, and then they kind of turn around and come back and say, you did what? And then, I don't know if I'd like that. And like, well, there's no good way to find out. And then they would taste it. And the rind is wonderful. All of our cheeses the rinds are edible. And the coffee and lavender come out very wonderfully. Michael, you should have lots to say about Barely Buzzed. This is the cheese that definitely put us on the map.
You know, it's one of those cheeses that for the longest time was the ending of all of my cheese boards. You know, when I do a class and teach through there, I'd always have the Barely Buzzed on there because it's such a great way to wrap up, because it could be a dessert in itself. It's kind of like at the end of a meal having a little cup of coffee and a little dessert, and having these together are just phenomenal. I'm using it on Monday for an event that I have, with a special event, and you know, it's a senior center, and I thought it would really be fun, and everybody is just so anxious to try that, because they've never even heard of it, and so they're really excited about that class. But pairing wise, there's just so much that you can do with this, because the coffee does lend itself. It's not an overpowering, but it does penetrate through. The rind brings it up, but it doesn't give you like you're sucking on a bean. It really does add some nice flavor. I'm pairing it up with a Fat Toad goat caramel, and this is a spicy dark chocolate.
Oh, making me jealous.
Dark chocolate, and this is absolutely fabulous. The coffee, the chocolate there, and it just brings out so many things. It just works easily together. So, you can do a lot with that, make that a dessert. And also, I have a raspberry spread that the chocolate, the raspberry, and this cheese with the coffee would be just crazy good too.
And I love it with Rustic Bakery's cocoa nib chocolate cookies. I mean, I love it with that as well. It's really good.
Yes. I have some Effie's cocoa, which has got coconut in it, and it's malt, in it, and so it works out just drizzling the chocolate on that with the cheese and the coffee, and it's just fabulous. Just
awesome.
Yeah, and again, like on all those, as I said before, you don't have to have anything additional to it. It lives and breathes and works very well on its own, but it is so nice to dress it up occasionally.
So I know you're a big beer connoisseur, Michael, but a brown beer, I mean, with Barely Buzzed is awesome. Really great.
The malts in beer, in dark beers like that, work out really well. A chocolate stout, oatmeal stout works very well, and then imperial stout does beautifully. But there's red ales that do really well because of that maltiness that associates with it. So you can do that. Blue Moon does an iced coffee beer, and I actually have it, but I have tried it with other things that works really well, but it would work as well.
That's good. When we first started, I took a trip down the west coast of California just to go visit some wineries, and it was hilarious because I visited about 20 wineries, and of the 20, I think 15 of them had our cheese already. I'm like, well, why did I even come? But our Barely Buzzed with like a medium Pinot Noir is just insane. So coffee with the cheese and the wine is super good. Another thing about Barely Buzzed that's interesting is it is my go-to grilled cheese sandwich cheese. It makes no sense at all, but it's, of all of our cheeses that I have, I love the Barely Buzzed. Red Butte Hatch chili is a close second, but I do mine out of Barely Buzzed. I love that cheese. So